Hi, this is Delilah S. Dawson, author of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, Black Spire, and Phasma, and you're listening to the Living Force podcast.
You're listening to
The Living Force.
Force is with me, and I am with the Force.
a Utini podcast.
Forgot it.
Episode 21, Comic Extravaganza.
Trust the Force.
On this episode,
Stop drinking that haterade. Everything comics and Utini reviews.
With your hosts,
All ships, prepare for jump to hyperspace.
Corey Helton, Eric Eilerson, and Charles Hankel.
Oh, and one more thing. On the total positive note, I won all 3 of my fantasy football leagues this week.
Yo, nice.
So that was a dope way to start out this week. I just sat on the couch and watched every single game on Sunday, drinking beer and following my fantasy lineups, and it was maybe one of the best days of my life. I'm not sure, but it's.
I watch football too on Sunday. Eric, you'll be proud of me. I watched the Georgia game. It was like a season opener game, not very good, but still.
You mean Saturday then?
What day?
College football Saturday.
Yeah, it must have been. Saturday.
Georgia's
I keep my
great.
days straight.
So
I was off one day. Yeah, they're apparently going to do really good this year. I don't know shit about their team, but I know enough about football. I actually grew up going to a lot of football games with my biological dad, but you know.
But I feel like that's one of the cool things about football, though, is that it's a very communal thing that even if you don't know what's going on, if you just get to a football game, or any sport game, honestly, if I just show up, you can have a great time.
Oh, yeah, it was a blast. I was just hanging out with my buddy, drinking some beer, and talking about Star Wars between plays. It was fun.
Yeah.
So essentially what we do here.
And there's a fresh one if you mouth off again.
Yes, because at football games, you talk about Star Wars between the plays, and here we talk about sports between the Star Wars. But that stops now, because we are on episode 21 of the Living Force podcast, where it is all Star Wars all the time. I am here, one of your hosts. Hi, I missed you this past week. I hope you're doing well. My name is Eric Eilerson, and I am, as always, with the doctors. Dr. Corey Helton, welcome.
What's up?
And fresh off an ungodly long shift is Dr. Charles Hankel.
Everything's
Hey, buddy.
fine here now. How are you?
Oh, good, yeah. Corey and Charles have been burning the midnight oil this week on these medical shifts.
I'm not yet. I'm still on day shift, but I go to nights next week, so
You'll hear it. The listeners will hear it in your voice on the next couple episodes.
yeah. I guess we're gonna have to do it on a weekend next recording, because like I was wrong about the hours at work. It's from 5 p.m. to 7 a.m. So it's 14-hour shifts. I'm like, yeah, every day for 5 days. I'm like, there's no way I'll have a free hour to do anything.
You don't think maybe when you get home at like 7:30 or so, you want to just hop on here and...
No.
Do an early morning one?
Yep, it's not gonna happen.
All right. Well, we'll make sure we keep that in mind for future episodes. For this episode, we are going to dive into the awesome world of Star Wars comics later on. But before we do that, we do unfortunately have to have a little bit of a serious chat. Not because of anything that's going on with the Living Force or you awesome listeners. Everything is great.
I hope so.
I hope. But
I mean, if any of our listeners are included in this big population, I don't want them to be our listeners
that's
anymore.
true, because we need to talk about some pretty bad gatekeeping harassment that's been going on in the Star Wars community this past week. Now, if you listen to last week's episode, we talked about Mar, who is a user on Twitter at Vibes with
Cisco.
Cisco, thank you very much. I'm like, Cusco? Vibes with Cisco, who live tweeted her joy of watching the Star Wars movies for the first time. It took off on Twitter. The official Star Wars account got involved. A lot of people sent her stuff. It was a great moment for Star Wars. And since she has done that, this weekend especially, she has been harassed by people who are jealous that they haven't gotten noticed.
Freaking blew it.
Yeah, it's been... I mean, and you have your Last Jedi haters and all things like that are going after her, to the point where she got doxxed. Her personal info got spread around in a group chat. People were threatening all kinds of things to her. She had to get a lawyer. And we talked about this a lot within the Living Force Slack, within Utini itself. And Charles actually came up with this term that I want to use for this, because we are not gatekeepers at Utini, but we are hate keepers. We officially are drawing a line, black and white. If you are any type of person that has harassed someone online because of their Star Wars love, has diminished their own fandom because it didn't align with yours, whether it be their ship of a certain character, whether it be their love of a certain movie, whatever that is, frankly, you have no business being in Star Wars fandom. These are people that actually love the thing we all love, and I don't know what it is that makes people want to tear them down when we should be exalting them for this awesome joy they are putting in this community.
Yeah, it's truly obnoxious. I just don't understand why this particular fandom, more so than any other fandom. I mean, how can you go see the films and watch the Clone Wars TV show, read the books? How can you do all that and then, like, personally attack somebody for having an opinion that's different than yours? I mean, like, seriously, if you do that, I'll freaking say it, I think you're a piece of shit. Like,
yeah.
I just don't understand why you would do that. I just don't understand how you could be so sick. I mean, people that love Star Wars, we're all nerds. We're all probably bullied at some point for being a nerd.
Yeah.
It's not like we don't know what the hell that's all about.
Yeah, so
I just don't understand.
And I think what bothers me the most is it's so counterintuitive, because you apparently are a part of Star Wars Twitter or the podcast community or whatever it is because you love Star Wars, and yet you are actively helping to destroy it by keeping other fans out of it that are going to keep this entire saga going into the future.
Right.
Like, it just
I mean,
it
do you
doesn't
want it?
even make
Do they
sense.
want it to die? I mean, they just want no more movies, I guess. Is
Exactly,
that what they're after?
yeah.
Like what the? I just don't.
yeah, so we just wanted to make that very clear to anyone listening and anyone that knows us that we don't put up with that. And especially if you are a person that has a following on Twitter or that you have your own podcast or anything like that, and you think it's fun to, poke fun at Aurelo or, like, say something snide and, like, subtweety about someone like Mar, maybe in past years we could do that. We could make little jokes about each other and we could think it was fine. Not how it is anymore, okay? Like, people that are doing this harassment, that are actually going that level to get people's personal info, are going to use that as permission. Mm-hmm. That's saying, look at this person who says they're a positive force in this fan community, making fun of this other person. Cool. That lets me go even one step further, which lets someone else go one step further. So,
right.
At the end of the day, like we say in this podcast, we are all part of the living force together, and we need to exude that love and that positivity and that acceptance of all people. However, that does not mean we need to accept this hate and these attacks on people that are just trying to love Star Wars.
We need to have the high ground against this type of negativity.
Exactly.
Right. And I think as a community a little bit we have maybe failed to in that regard, because we have been really passive, I think, in recent years in our sort of defense of people who are in the right. Like, I mean, it's one thing, like, we hear lots of people say things like, oh, yeah, what happened to Kelly Marie Tran? That was all really awful. What happened to Jake Lloyd? That was really awful. But nobody just says, like, listen, if you do this, you're a dick. Like,
yeah.
I mean, there's no way around it. You're a disgusting human being if you participate in this type of harassment of anybody. Like,
yeah.
there's no positive way to spin it. And I'm not going to be soft about it. Like,
nope.
I've been really soft about a lot of, like, all the Last Jedi hate and blah, 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 whatever, people are critical of movies. But, like, I just don't have any ounce of approval for any sort of behavior that is personally attacking of an individual. I mean, this is such a step further to me even than harassing Kelly Marie Tran. Like, this is this is just somebody that had positive things to say about watching the films. Like, what the hell? I just can't imagine. Like, there's no right thing that you can do, like, with this super loud vocal minority. And if you know people in your life that are like that, call them on it.
Yes.
Like, if you're out hanging out with somebody and, like, they're one of your Star Wars friends and they meet somebody new and they ask them what their opinion of The Last Jedi and they scoff at them, call them on that crap. Like, it's not cool to crap on anything that someone else likes. It's just not cool to do that. Like, people do that to you. They probably did that to you growing up because you like Star Wars, and we still live in a day and age where it's, like, still kind of questionably uncool to be as passionate about Star Wars as a lot of us are. And, like, I mean, call people on their crap, man. Like, if you have people in your life that are like that, you gotta call them out for it because it's just not right.
Yeah,
Right.
And if you're a new listener, maybe to this episode, we don't usually go on rants like this, but this is something that's really been bothering us, and so we kind of wanted to get it off of our chest. And if you happen to be new and you have not listened to maybe our first episodes that we've done, we really are striving to be a positive force in this community, and that's why we're taking this stance on this right now. And whoever you are, whatever your opinions are on the different movies, TV shows, books, comics, whatever it is, I just want to say thank you for listening. You're welcome here. We appreciate you, and we want to hear your opinions on things and have educated conversations about them. But you are not wrong for loving anything you love or for not liking anything that you don't like.
Absolutely.
And that's that.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
if we get to a place in our own content down the road and we stray from this somehow, if something happens, like, we would love you as listeners, as frankly our friends online, like, call us on it as well. Like, we always try. Sometimes we have off days.
Yeah.
But I think that's the only way this is all kind of how this can all be healed, is by all of us holding each other accountable and really pushing forward together, united.
Right.
So that's what we're going to endeavor to do.
We've talked about this a lot. It's completely possible to be respectful and also critical, and like we really try to do that in when we do our book roundtable episodes. Like, we really go way out of our way to, even if behind the scenes maybe we have some more kind of private conversations about, like, I dislike this, I dislike that. Like, we really try not to talk about that kind of stuff because it's not appropriate to be negative, like, publicly like that. It's not appropriate to just call out authors for the writing style. It's just that's not cool. Right? We want to interview these folks, right? We want to encourage them to keep creating the amazing art that they're creating. So it's important to us to. The reason, Charles, you put it better than I'm putting it now, but it's just better to. It's better to. What's that? What's the Rose line from Last Jedi?
We're gonna win by not fighting what we hate, by saving what we love.
Yes, that's so true. I mean, it's just so true. And, like, I don't know. I don't believe in being super negative like this all the time. It's just this whole Mar thing has really pissed me off because I'm pretty sure that she's like a high school age girl, if I had to guess. Like, maybe early 20s, if I had to guess. She's somebody that's, like, at a very significant time in her love of a new fandom.
And this was a huge moment in her life. Like, you could tell the way she talked about it. She was so excited, and I know that she inspired other people to watch for the first time, which was amazing, but I dearly hope that this hate has not also done the opposite. Like, maybe someone was like, maybe I should watch Star Wars because I think Reylo is interesting, and then they see what happened to her and said, God, no, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. So Jesus, I know that's the worst part of it. Someone take her to Celebration and show her the light that people are not this awful everywhere else. It's just this super loud vocal minority. Yep. So I am hoping that we get to see Mara at Celebration, and I feel like there's a decent chance that we'll get her there.
I think so too. All right, well, that's enough of a rant. I feel better because we've talked about it. I'm sorry that, like, I got a little aggressive there. I'm a little tense about it.
We gotta stand up for people. I mean, and we, again, you know, as weird as it is to say this podcast is a voice that we have, and we want to be able to use that for people that may not have it or that we truly believe in. So, Mar, we're with you. Raylos, we're with you. Anyone that loves Star Wars,
everybody,
we're right beside
everybody, we're with you.
Everybody.
Unless you're out there crap on everybody else. In that case, I'm not with you, and I'll say that to your face.
Exactly. All right. Whew. So, that being said, a couple more things in our more usual episode. We got some sweet Utini reviews, everybody. Yes, indeed. As we say every week, we try to highlight some people that are giving community reviews over on utini.com. Again, as a reminder, you can go on the book profile for any single book that you love in Star Wars over at utini.com, and at the bottom of the page, you can rate a book 1 to 5 stars and write a little blurb about it. And a user named Quentin T went through, did a couple reviews this past week. Did some Bane reviews, did some Black Spire reviews, and I just wanted to highlight their review for Black Spire here real quick, because this past week, my full review of Black Spire went up on the site, since it was a couple days after release, and we will be doing a roundtable on that a couple weeks from now. But for right now, here are Quentin's thoughts. Critic gave Black Spire a 4 out of 5 and said, if you have gone to Galaxy's Edge or plan to, this book is perfect for you. I got Black Spire not expecting anything amazing, but I had faith that it would be good on knowing that it was written by Delilah Dawson, friend of the show, who has written one of my favorite canon books, Phasma. I was happily surprised how much I enjoyed this book. I was worried it would be super meta, being that it is a Galaxy's Edge tie-in novel. Luckily, it barely felt like such. There was maybe one chapter that felt that way. What makes this book great is it almost is like a sequel to Phasma if she was in the book, but it had many characters from Phasma. If you like that book, this will be good for you. But even if you haven't, this book will still be good for you. 4 stars out of 5 for Black Spire.
I like that. Charles, have you finished it yet?
I am not. I got behind when I was on nights. There's just very little time, but I'm itching to finish it. It's been really, really fun.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I feel like, Eric, I kind of know what you think because I read your review, but, like, I mean, in general, I think we all liked it pretty well, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's sitting at, I think like an 8.6, 8.7 right now from the team.
I think it would definitely be kind of on the right of the bell curve, like, of the more successful books in the series. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I was a bit worried at the start of it because I was just in this weird mood, and it does start a little slow. But once you kind of get going with the momentum, the character work is great. It hits a bunch of topics like trauma and PTSD and human forgiveness that's not really touched a lot in Star Wars.
Right,
and
totally.
I think it was done super well, super respectfully, but not in a way that made it like a super obvious thing. So
Yeah.
really solid.
Batu sounds so flippin' awesome. I mean, I picture Mos Eisley, like, 100% when I'm reading this. Like, I mean, Batu sounds very similar to Mos Eisley, and I love it.
Yeah, so we definitely endorse that as well. One more announcement before we get into the meat of this show. We have a new patron over on Patreon who is Chris Richmond, which I believe, I haven't actually texted him about this. That might be my best friend from high school, y'all.
What?
Chris,
Are you
if that's you,
serious?
man. If not, this is a crazy coincidence. I meant to message you about this and ask you.
Is that real, Eric?
Yeah, it's my best friend in high school, and I mean, we lives drift apart. We just out of touch, but he does a lot of D&D stuff now and makes miniatures. If this is not the Chris Richmond that's on Patreon right now, I mean, thank you as well.
This is literally the first that Charles and I have heard of this.
I know, I wanted to hold it for the podcast. But thanks, dude. This is super rad.
Yes, welcome to the show, man. Somebody else is giving us money, guys. How is this possible? We're literally not doing a single damn thing for any of these people, and they're giving us money. I love you guys. You guys are so incredibly awesome, and you make me really excited to get started for our Patreon. Like, to start out with some type of, I was working on our Patreon kind of tiers today, and to start out with some sort of momentum, like, before we've even started, is so encouraging.
It's
guys.
amazing.
Like, we're going to make it worth it to you, like, because you've already proven that people are willing to support us, right? And that just means so much. The site, the podcast, and, like, we're really going to try to go out of our way to make it worthwhile, and we're going to try to do something special for everyone that kind of comes in, sort of grandfathered in, especially. So, take that as you will.
Yeah.
Go sign up for our Patreon.
All I know is I need to text some of my friends from high school because they're not currently patrons. But apparently that's a thing.
Any friends from high school.
All right, so patreon.com/utini is where you'll find us. Again, no tiers up there yet, but like Corey was saying, we are very, very close to solidifying them. We got some really cool, fun ideas.
It's
in
coming
October.
in 1 month.
Yep. Oh my God, that's gonna be so cool. There's gonna be.
We got a lot of work to do, guys.
Yep. Yeah, we do. So, I just had an idea for the Patreon, but I'm gonna talk to you guys off air because I have a bad habit of promising things on this podcast that we're gonna do.
You better write it down.
All right. Let's see. Corey, do we have any other Utini news that we want to hit?
Yeah, let's go ahead and shout out the bookshelf again. That is coming out on September 20th, 10 days from date of record. Today is September 10th. Man, the bookshelf is coming out. I can't believe that. I scheduled another email to go out about that.
Yeah, if you're not on our email list, go to utini.com and get on that email. Corey put together this, honestly, beautiful email blast, which sounds so weird to say because it's an email blast, but the formatting of it was gorgeous. You get a little sneak peek at what the bookshelf is going to look like. It tells you all the books that came out the past month, all the new collections we added in the last month. It was seriously
Yeah,
awesome.
I learned how to do email skies. Like, I've known a lot about it so far, but like, it just never occurred to me to do it in this fashion. And I like built it out before I assembled it. Like, I did it in design. Like, I designed it first. And man, if you're not on our email list already, and if you're concerned about missing book releases and stuff, like, we're going to do a monthly roundup where we talk about every major episode of the podcast, every book that's come out, significant stuff that's happened on the website. All that kind of stuff is all going to coming in an email roundup at the end of the month. So go sign up for our email list. It's on the website.
Yeah, because I mean, even I was jumping around on the site, and I forgot that we get the hardcover of Dooku Jedi Lost coming out October 1st. I forgot that we get the Skywalker saga coming out. Like,
yes, I forgot. We got big stuff coming out, which we're going to try to have to cover. And I think a lot of the mainline stuff, we're definitely going to continue to cover all the novels and big, huge releases that, you know, have the majority reading. But like, I think a lot of behind the scenes stuff can definitely happen in Patreon because there's a lot of really great stuff coming out. So
yeah, very excited for all of that, and stay tuned to the email list for that. All right, so we are going to jump into the meat and potatoes of this episode in just a second, all about comics. But before we do that, guys, I want to hear an emotional, a beautiful, a tender clip from one of our members. So we will be right back.
Hi, this is Jared Mays. I'm a writer for Utini. I'm going to tell you about my very first time seeing Star Wars. It was the summer of '97. I was 5 years old. I remember standing outside in the rain with my dad in a line of about 50 college students in our small town in Arkansas, so excited to see something called Star Wars. I had no idea why everybody was so excited. It was almost as if they didn't realize that we were standing in the pouring rain. Now, I'm really glad that purchasing tickets to see movies has become a lot easier. You can do it from the comfort of your own couch on your phone. But that experience changed my life, as I'm sure it did many of yours as well. The buzz was electric. It was incredible just trying to keep up with the flying yellow text. And then, you know what happened. The Star Destroyer flew overhead, and I was hooked. I remember anxiously waiting for the next chapters in the story. I couldn't wait to find out whether or not Luke would fall to the dark side, or if he would be successful in overthrowing Darth Vader, or maybe, of course, rescuing him from himself. All of this, of course, I thought was brand new. The most cutting-edge movies ever made. I had no idea that they were already 20 years old, getting a re-release in preparation for yet another Star Wars movie on the horizon. Hey, we'd love to hear about your first time seeing Star Wars. Let us know on Twitter or, of course, in the Utini Discord. And in the meantime, may the Force be with you.
And we are back. It's been so long, guys. I missed you, frankly, during that clip.
It's been like 5 minutes, Eric.
I know, but it was 5 minutes back in the world that's not talking about Star Wars all the time, so
that's
it
fair.
felt like a year. But now we're back. We're happy. We had a great clip. I'm not going to get overly emotional because we are going to talk about comics. Now, if you have not read a bunch of Star Wars comics, man, did you pick a good episode of The Living Force to listen to, because the three of us have various amounts of Star Wars comics reading experience, so we're going to go through a little bit of that, highlight some of our favorite comics that exist right now, and talk about how you can join in the fun. Now, first of all, I want to ask you guys, Corey and Charles, how do you feel about comics as a whole? Like, when did you start reading comics? Have you read a ton? Are you kind of casual? Like, what's your comic history even outside of Star Wars?
When I was a kid, I was definitely into comics, like superhero comics, Spider-Man, those kind of things. Never was really into Star Wars comics that much, specifically. I don't think I knew that they existed, maybe, interestingly enough. But I know that I got, like, the volume of, like, I guess they were, was it Dark Horse back then? Like, all the depictions of the major films. So I have those in, like, one big volume that I found at one point, and that was fun to just enjoy, like, the same stories that I already knew and loved, kind of in a different medium. And then I didn't really get back into them until I got experienced here with Utini, because everyone else was kind of just getting me jazzed about some of the new canon stuff that was coming out, and so I got back into it. And I'm definitely not on, like, all of the new issues as they come out. I'm definitely behind in that kind of respect, but I try to keep up with it, and it's been a lot of fun.
did you guys grow up going to like comic book stores and stuff? I mean, how did you get into them?
I didn't read comics at all until really I got to college, because one of the guys in my dorm hall had a ton of graphic novels. It was Why the Last Man from Image and the Ultimate Spider-Man comics from Marvel, and I would just go down to his room and just borrow them. Like, we were hanging out one night, I'm like, I guess I'll look through this, and then I would just go back and forth, and just devour them. And then I read like Watchmen, I read Dark Knight Returns, and kind of like some of the bigger ones out of the way. And then for about, age 18 until I was 25 maybe, I was buying like comics weekly, like as they came out, just going to the comic book store, getting comic books, buying big collections. I had huge like bookshelves full of comics. And then I started moving a lot more and realized they were hard to move, so I kind of switched to digital. And I still love comics. Like, there's still some comic books that I go back and read a couple times a year. I try to stay up on what's going on in some of the bigger comic books, but Star Wars comics are now the only ones that I actually buy as they come out. And I'm the same as you, Charles. I didn't even know they existed as a kid when Dark Horse had the license.
Yeah.
So for those of you that don't know, Marvel now, because of the Disney acquisition, holds the license for Star Wars comics. Dark Horse, another publishing company, had them back in the day, so they were doing what are now Legends comics. So, but yeah, I have then jumped on in Star Wars #1 when they released that from Marvel, and I've read most of the series they've put out.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Yeah, so I mean, my comic book history is much more limited than both of you guys. Like, we were actually talking about this the other day of like maybe spinning this episode in a light of like, I have not really had a lot of experience with comics, and like, you guys should teach me about comics. So funny enough, Star Wars specifically, the Star Wars comics have, to me, felt like, even still right now in this very moment, even after founding flipping Utini, all right, Star Wars comics still feel to me the way that I remember feeling staring at that gigantic Star Wars bookshelf at Barnes & Noble as a kid. Like, it's just so overwhelming. And comic arcs are, I think, harder to even jump into than like picking up a novel in the third book in a 9-book series.
Ooh,
right?
interesting.
Because like you have to know the characters, and they're so fast paced, they're so quick moving. To me, it's kind of harder to break into, and like, I'm super ADD, so it's kind of hard for me to read comics, and I have to read one or two like before I can kind of get my brain working, because I just don't have a lot of experience reading them. But I just don't have a lot of experience reading comics really growing up, period. And I didn't have a comic book store growing up. You guys have heard me talk about being from the middle of nowhere in North Georgia. Like, I didn't have comics. Comics were not, they didn't sell those at Walmart, right?
Right.
where everybody did their shopping in the boonies, right? Well, they didn't have them there.
That's hilarious, because I like specifically remember I would go grocery shopping with my mom as a kid, and she would go off to find the food, and I would just sit in like the magazine/comic section and just read comics until she came back.
They had magazines, but they did not have comics in my local Walmart.
Well, thank you, Bilo in Somerville, South Carolina. You're the real MVP.
Well, hopefully then throughout this episode, we can demystify that for you too, Corey. Real quick,
please do.
Before we continue, we got breaking news on this podcast recording, because we just received a new patron as we are recording.
We did. Sorry for... There was a couple of seconds ago where I started talking really slow. I was trying to show Charles and Eric in the camera while I'm speaking that we got a new patron, Ross Greco. Man, you became a patron literally as we're recording this podcast.
Yeah,
so that should say a lot. You get a special shout out this episode, especially
real time.
You guys are awesome.
Yeah, and Ross has been awesome, like on Twitter. He's a great Twitter follow. He's super involved in our community. So Ross, thanks, dude. Super appreciated. Just wanted to give you a shout out as we are recording this.
Yeah.
Now, back to the comic talk. So, I do want to hit in a second on how it's hard to jump into comics because, they're all numbered. Like, it's Star Wars issue 64. How will I know the first whatever? But before that, I want to just touch on a couple things that comics can do that novels can't, and then novels can do that comics can't. Because I still think there's a weird stigma in this country, but really all over the world, that comics are a lesser version of storytelling. That they're for kids, they're silly, they can't be as mature, tell as gripping stories as a novel can. And I mean, I fell into that when I was younger, when I was a teenager. You know, I think that I definitely had that in my head before I started reading. And once you get into comics, there's really an awesome sense of discovery that you have, because for any story you could want, there's a comic for it. There are indie comics that are about relationships and people falling in love and trying to find their purpose in life. There are superhero comics with amazing action sequences. There are epic space battles in comics. For every kind of book, there is a comic. And I think that what novels can do, I think personally a little better, is get you within the psyche of a character maybe a little more, because you have more pages, more real estate. Whereas comics really help me as a visual person to see even just who the characters are. You know, with a lot of these books, like Alphabet Squadron especially, we mentioned this in our roundtable, I loved that we got character portraits of the characters when they released the book.
That's always really cool.
Which was huge, because you can describe who someone is all you want, and I do love how authors can do that, but getting an actual image either in a web announcement or on a comic book page is so cool, because you're like, no, this is who they are. This is it. And the artist can put their flair into it. You can see so much personality in, like, the line of a brush.
Totally.
And I think that should be
totally
respected and lauded. Hardcore.
Yeah. Something else I was going to add, too, that's pretty important, Star Wars comics specifically, is, like, you know, I don't know, I've not read a lot of the comics, but I do know a good deal about them, because you kind of have to if you built the website that I built. You kind of have to know a good deal about the comics. Right. I know how they work. I've read a handful of them, but a lot of super important stuff happens in the comics in Star Wars. Like, arguably, you know, connections to, like, the big saga stuff, like with Rey and Poe and Finn. Like, arguably more stuff with the sequel trilogy, like, has happened in the expanded universe in the comics than it has the books. And that's really just because there's just not as much room to talk, like you said. Like, you have to tell shorter stories. But you have Poe's whole background. He's a whole line. Like, if his mother, like, there's all this crazy stuff.
You find out where, like, why Snap Wexley wasn't in Episode 8. You find out where Black Squadron was and all those things.
Right. Like, stuff that's important. The way that Legends kind of used to be with the books, that's the comics has kind of been that for canon stuff. So if you're just, like, avoided comics for whatever reason, like, you really shouldn't, because I mean it kind of matters.
Yeah.
Like,
and real quick, I just want to go through a list here of I was looking through Marvel the other day, and here's just a list of some of the canon comics that have come out since Marvel's acquisition, or Disney's acquisition of both Marvel and Star Wars. We got Star Wars, just called Star Wars, Darth Vader, Lord of the Sith, Vader Down, Poe Dameron, Dr. Aphra, Princess Leia, Han Solo Imperial Cadet, Lando Double or Nothing, Thrawn, Kanan the Last Padawan, Age of Republic, Age of Rebellion, Age of Resistance, Galaxy's Edge, TIE Fighter, Target Vader, and more. And these are all multiple issue series. And I think this is where what you were saying, Corey, kind of comes into play. There is so much. There are so many titles. They're being released monthly, sometimes bi-monthly, that how in the world do you pick where to start, right?
Yeah.
And I think, ultimately, the answer to that question is the answer to everything else we say in Utini. It's pick your character, pick your people, and just jump right in. And I think comics actually makes that easier than novels, frankly, because it says right on the flippin' cover who's in it.
Yes. Yes, and that's an important topic to bring up, which is something I really want to talk about with you guys, is I made what I think is kind of like a super amateur mistake. Like, and you guys are going to get a kick out of this. Okay, so at Utini, we talk a lot about like how we don't think you should read in chronological order, right? We talk a lot about how we don't think you should read in publishing order. Like, you shouldn't pick some stupid arbitrary order and then read in it, right? We talk about that pretty frequently, and I did that with the comics, right? So, funny story. So back in the day when we were selling a lot of the books, I had a really good discount on getting the books, so like a 55-ish% discount on getting the books as we were selling them all. And because I had the discount, I bought right before we discontinued selling the books. I bought all the trade paperback graphic novels, of all the comics and stuff. And I was like, okay, this is really sick. And then somebody else on our team, they bought all of the hardcover comics. All right, so I had already paid for mine and bought my paperbacks, and then Carl bought all of his hardcover books, and I got all of these hardcover books. And then as soon as I saw them, I was like, oh my God, I have to have the hardcovers.
Right. I remember that.
So
I remember that.
I had spent like some ridiculous amount of money, like $200 on the paperbacks, and I told my wife, I was like, listen, it'll be fine. I'll sell these on eBay. Okay, I'll get my money back. I'll use that money to pay for the trade paperbacks. And she's like, oh, okay, fine. You can buy the hardcovers if you want them. Guys, I never was able to get rid of them on eBay.
Oh no!
So
oh my God.
I have all the paperbacks and all the hardcovers on my shelf, and I'm like, okay, so I have my giant collection of comics. I have basically all of them that have ever been made so far, right?
We're gonna have to talk about that after the show. Anyway, go on.
Yes, and I've barely and I've barely made a dent in them because, swinging back around to my original point, I picked this stupid arbitrary order. I said, listen, the Star Wars mainline comic, it's the most important one, right? It's the Star Wars comic, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's the one I'm going to read first, and I'm not going to read anything else until I get to that. That's a terrible, terrible way to attack any sort of gigantic collection, especially like Star Wars. And I highly recommend not just picking the Star Wars mainline comic and trying to get through it. The reason for that is it's enormous. There's like 4 hardcover volumes of Star Wars mainline comic, and I have not made a dent in it because it's overwhelming. It's not my favorite of all the comics I've ever read, and I feel like I have to finish it before I can move on to the next thing. And that has completely hindered my ability to get through any of the comics.
And I think that's an excellent point because the comics. So for those of you that haven't read comics in general, right? A lot of comics nowadays are split up into like 4 to 6 issue arcs. So you'll have a 4 to 6 part story that can be collected into one volume. It's released monthly or bi-monthly, and at the end of it, they'll release one volume like Corey bought. So you can have this full story in your hand, and the next volume comes out and you have a full story, etc., etc. And I think one of the cool things about that is that you can choose how you read. You can choose your reading speed. You can read 2 issues, go to bed, that's fine. You can read a whole volume and then say, cool,
right,
now I want to go on to Vader, or I'm in the mood for Lando, or like whatever that is. It's a lot easier to kind of maneuver as opposed to a novel. So
yeah, and that's actually something we should probably talk about a little more too. Is like how exactly do the comics work, right? Well, I'll just say this really, really quick. So, in Star Wars, especially because that's really what you guys care about, I assume. You have single issue comics; those come out every single week. What's the day of the week the comics come out? Wednesday. Yeah, comics come out every single Wednesday. Okay, single issues. They're 20-ish pages. How many pages are they?
22. Usually 22 pages for $4.
Yes, 22 pages for $4. It's super overwhelming for anybody that's never been in the comics because it turns out to be really expensive, right? If you buy the comics every single week.
Yes, it does, Corey.
Yes, it does. Okay, so Star Wars comics, they come out as single issues every single week. However, eventually, at least historically, they will eventually bound them into what's called a trade paperback, which is often referred to as a graphic novel. So I've always called these graphic novels. A lot of people that are really in the comic industry, they call them trade paperbacks.
The graphic novel is oftentimes one single story that's not split up into issues. So like if a person wants to just release a 250-page novel that is a comic, then it'll be called a graphic novel, as opposed to comics are trade paperbacks.
Right. So it's a little confusing. Yep. So in Star Wars, however, the graphic novels are really cool because a lot of times they don't only include like the single issue comics that are the title. For example, like the Star Wars mainline comic or the Star Wars mainline comic graphic novel, like Volume 1, for example, it might have like 5 or 6 of the Star Wars mainline comics in order, and then like a Han Solo issue because it's a similar story arc and it fits in with the same stuff, and it's all bound in one nice like booklet, right? So like when you go to Barnes & Noble and you're looking at all the section of like trade paperbacks, that's what you're looking at. It is bound single issues. Like it's the whole collection of single issues of that entire line. So like the Thrawn trade paperback is all of the Thrawn comics that were printed as single issues and released weekly, except now they've been rebound together in a quote-unquote graphic novel / trade paperback.
Right.
If that makes any sense at all. That was super confusing for me when I first got into this, by the way. Like, I was like, what are graphic novels? And how are they different from comic books?
Yeah. I mean,
they're not.
They're not. And what I want to do on this episode now is go through. I have randomly picked four series of Star Wars canon comics that are pretty popular, that are pretty well received, and I believe between the three of us, at least one or two of us has read each of them. And I just want to give kind of our thoughts and say if you're thinking about picking up Star Wars comics, then these are probably the issues that you should start with. And then at the end, we'll tell you a bunch of different ways you can get them, including physical and digital, which I don't even want to touch yet. So the first one I want to start with is what we've mentioned a bunch of times already, is simply Star Wars. The main line of Star Wars comics, it says Star Wars on it. Volume 1 is called Skywalker Strikes. These comics start out taking place between episodes 4 and 5, which is awesome. Charles is holding up the cover right in front of the camera right now. You can't see it, but it is written by Jason Aaron, drawn by John Cassaday. If you're a comic book fan, he's a big name. And it has Luke in the gold victory jacket from the end of New Hope. And it's awesome because it's just a main storyline that is about to actually end at issue 70-something in the next couple months that shows us the main characters on a new adventure. It's Luke, Han, Leia, just going for it. You get to see Luke encounter Vader for the first time. You get to see some cool adventures with the Mon Calamari. And I honestly think that, I know, Corey, you're having a bit of a tough time, like, kind of marathoning it, which is totally understandable. But if you're just reading your first trade paperback, I think it's a great place to start.
Yeah, Volume 1, actually, the whole first volume is pretty good.
Yeah, I think...
Charles, now you were holding that. You've read that, right?
Oh, yeah, I have. I've read up to, like, volume, I think, 7 of the main line. And early on, I think it's a lot better than later. But I just think it's really interesting because, you know, you have to remember all of this stuff is canon, right? Like, since Disney took over, all of this stuff actually happened. And there's a ton of story. Think about how many issues you just said that they've had of this.
Yeah, 70, 71, 74 is coming out.
Yeah, and this all takes place after A New Hope, but before Empire, if I'm not mistaken, right? Did they get past Empire
they might have done a jump past Empire, but I'm not, because I'm a little behind at this moment, because now I'm waiting for it all, because now that I know it's ending, I'm going to give it some time.
Right. Yeah, no, but it really is, at least volume 1 and 2 specifically, I thought were incredible.
Yeah, I really enjoyed those first two. Sorry, real quick, Corey, we have more breaking news, don't we?
I hope this keeps happening forever. Holy crap, we have another patron. Let's see here. Tara Tano.
Oh my god, Ahsoka's sister.
Yeah, apparently Ahsoka's sister also just became a patron during this episode. Man, I hope I get like 5 more notifications like this. I'll be rich.
Oh my god, thank you so much. Tara, Tano. Wow.
Tomato.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Welcome to the family. All right.
We can't keep doing this.
I know.
This has just got to stop.
No, Corey.
If there's any more, it's going to be the next episode.
Nope, we literally can't. So yeah, I think the first couple trades of the first Star Wars mainline are great. They're very much cinematic, and I think that they give us some new adventures with the main characters, and they're all written very well. Like, it sounds like Luke. It sounds like whiny Luke a bit. It sounds like Han, but it sounds a little bit like asshole Han. You know, it's who they are at the end of A New Hope. So, highly, highly recommend that just for your basic, I want OT Star Wars.
It is important. Don't feel like you have to start with this main line because
you don't have
it
to.
is the main line. Because it is it is huge, okay, and that's the biggest. Like, you wouldn't tell somebody to start with the books. You wouldn't tell them to start with the New Jedi Order series, right? The 19-book series, right?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of crazy.
But I feel like that's.
But it is good. It's very, very good.
Yeah. And another thing, just to keep in mind, is that there are crossovers, right? Like in these comics as well. So like my favorite, actually, like. I guess is this called a trade paperback? I don't even understand the terminology.
Yeah, it is.
But Vader Down is like one of my absolute favorite things, and I know you mentioned it earlier, Eric. I'm not gonna get into it, but it is like a big crossover between the main line, between Dr. Aphra. It's just
Vader
Vader as well. Yeah, it really is incredible, and so it's okay to read one volume of the main line and then go read one volume of Aphra, and actually it's kind of meant for you to jump around like that and then enjoy these big arcs where it's all these characters coming together.
100%.
That's why it's fun to read the trade paperback rather than single issues, in my opinion, is because like they're like, you know, circular story arcs. Like they're completed, right? Like the Star Wars Volume 1 is a complete end-to-end story, and then you can put it down after you finish it and go to something else, and it's awesome.
It's kind of like binging a season of television versus watching week to week.
Yeah,
exactly.
So moving on from Star Wars to a completely different series is Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith. Now, this gets a bit confusing because there was a series called Darth Vader, just period, which came out at the same time as the original Star Wars line did. It's very good. It crosses over with the main line a bit. And then it ended, and then a new series started called Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, written by Charles Soule. And this series, if you loved the Bane trilogy, if you loved dark side mythology, and like you want to see Vader just going ape and figuring out all this history of the Sith, this is a series for you. This brings in ancient Sith Lords. This brings in the last bits of Anakin still struggling with becoming Vader, which is... I mean, I love that. I love that stuff. Like, figuring out how can he maybe resurrect Padme with his immortal powers and all this kind of stuff. It is a gloriously brutal and just heart-wrenching series.
It's so violent. It really is. And it's amazing. Like, the last scene in Rogue One, this is basically that, except
that Vader.
For pages and pages.
That's like a really good point to bring up. That's what comics can do for you, right? Is think about how you felt like viscerally watching Vader ignite his lightsaber at the end of Rogue One, and then think about how you felt reading like Lords of the Sith, and it's describing very similar, like just absolute carnage, but there's just something about being able to see it, right?
Yeah, I mean, you brought up Vader down earlier, and I'm just going to touch on that again because there's a line that I'll never forget from that. Vader crashes his TIE fighter, and all these rebel soldiers surround him, and you get to see the vastness of this army.
Yeah.
And they say, "You're surrounded," and he says, "All I'm surrounded by is fear and dead men."
Dear God.
And it's so awesome. So,
it is. Visceral is really an excellent word to choose, Charles, because like... Yeah, there's epic force powers in the comics, and you just don't capture that really.
Vader is really Vader's in a lot of Star Wars comics, maybe too many Star Wars comics at this point. But Lord of the Sith, I think, is his peak right now. And Charles Soule is the writer that's going to be writing the Knights of Ren comic series that's coming out later this fall.
That's right. Which we said we're committing to diving into the comics for the first time. That'll probably be patron exclusive stuff, but we will probably bring it into the mainline show a little bit because we've talked about it so much. So
absolutely. Now, one of the cool things about the comics as well is that they can introduce brand new characters that people can latch onto, sometimes to the point where they receive their own Black Series figure despite never having appeared in any other medium. I am speaking now, of course, of Dr. Aphra, who is, I'm going to say, she is like the Thrawn of canon. She is a character.
I think she is too.
Yeah, she was created only in the comics, has only ever existed in the comics, and she has built such a huge fan following that they literally voted to give her a Black Series figure. She exists in that medium. She is crossing over into other comics. People want her in live action so much. And if you haven't read Dr. Aphra, the best pitch I can make is that she's kind of like an Indiana Jones archaeologist with a dark side that once worked for Darth Vader and has a pair of murder droids that mirror 3PO and R2. And if you're not already in, I don't believe you. It's such a cool pitch.
Yes. And she's kind of a bad guy, I would maybe go as far to say.
Morally questionable. Yes,
maybe has a heart of gold, a lot like Han Solo does, but
Very
at
much.
the same time, like, she's kind of an Imperial and interacts as an Imperial a lot of times, and that is so fun to read about. Like, it's kind of like what I really wanted the Battlefront campaign to be, but ended up not really being super. Is like she's very morally questionable, and it's so fun.
Yeah,
it's super fun.
Yeah, and as I like to point out as much as we can, she is also a queer woman of color that is a lead in a Star Wars property that people love.
Yeah.
Which is awesome, and it's addressed in the comics, and that's cool. Like, representation, as far as that goes, we've said a bunch of times, is bigger in the novels and comics. But yeah, so that's cool. She's breaking down barriers, being a badass, being hilarious, and I think we're gonna see a lot of Dr. Aphra coming up. And rounding out our list of comics that we kind of want to dive a bit deeper into is one of my actual favorites. One that I didn't think I was going to love as much as I did. One that actually has a lot more substance than I think it had any right to, and that is the Poe Dameron comic. Now,
Yeah.
we all love Poe Dameron. How can you not? He's the best pilot in the galaxy. But this series gives us a lot more than just Poe's adventures. It tells us all about Black Squadron, which you honestly wouldn't know about if you didn't read this comic. We've seen Snap Wexley and stuff, but this tells you about their personal relationships. It tells you about other missions. It tells you about all these other parts of Poe's personality, and I freaking loved this series.
Yeah, this one is definitely up there for me as well. And, you know, you've probably heard the saying, like, a hero's only as good as their villain. What this series does really interestingly is introduce one of my actual favorite Star Wars villains in Agent Terex. Like, he is one of the coolest guys. Like, he's not, you know, he doesn't have to be a Sith Lord. He's just, like, a super hardcore, like, military guy. And he is actually scary. Like, you know, you fear for your hero. He's so cool.
Absolutely. And this actually gave us, I believe, the first post-Last Jedi content in this last arc, because Poe is essentially telling a story of Black Squadron to Rey aboard the Millennium Falcon at the end. So there's a little bit of that in there, and the art is really good. The pacing is fun, and if you're missing some of this high-flying starfighter action, you got to pick this one up. I think it's just a blast. Definitely pick up Poe Dameron. If you're a fan of, again, Alphabet Squadron, the old X-Wing comics, it's going to give you what you want. The ships are just drawn beautifully. They're fast. They're fun. It's witty. I think this is actually also Charles Soule, who wrote Darth Vader, Lord of the Sith, and is doing Knights of Ren.
Yeah.
Right?
Is.
So basically just get Charles Soule comics is what I'm saying, I think, who is also a bit of Project Luminous, whatever the hell that is.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Charles Soule is kind of the superstar in comics, I would guess.
Yeah, so between Star Wars, Vader, Lord of the Sith, Dr. Aphra, Poe Dameron, you can be set for a good while, but man, there are, as we said earlier, so many comics to go through. Honestly,
yes. No, those that you just mentioned, those are all the series comics, right? Like
yes,
there are
those are all multiple
of
volumes.
all of those, yeah.
Yes, and there are other ones, like there's a Captain Phasma comic that's only a single arc.
What do they call those? Are these called one-shots? Is that their technical...
One-shot are single issues that are only one character. So the Age of Rebellion, the Age of Resistance comics that are coming out, they focus on one character. That's a one-shot.
Maybe, what would you call this?
Limited
like a
series.
A limited series.
Limited series.
Yes, there are like a lot of limited series in Star Wars. They're sort of like five-ish.
5 or
seems to be
6.
the sort of 5 or 6 issues seems to be the standard.
Yep.
And when those are bound into a graphic novel, they're great because it's a complete little end-to-end story. There's some good ones too. There's Thrawn. That's an awesome one. There's Phasma. That's an awesome one.
Chewbacca.
There are Chewbacca. There's a Lando one. Aren't there 2 Lando ones now?
Yeah, there's one that's just Lando, and there's one that's Lando Double or Nothing, which is young Lando.
Yeah.
There's Shattered Empire, where you get to meet Poe's parents, and it's right after the Battle of Endor. There's Anakin and Obi-Wan. Like, there's so many.
There's the TIE Fighter, which Eric mentioned earlier. That ties into
Alphabet Squadron.
It ties into Alphabet Squadron. Kind of tells the story of some of the TIE Fighter people that are like the TIE Fighter people. Jeez. Yes, it tells the story of like some of the villains that we get to meet a little bit in Alphabet Squadron. So there's some really good stuff in the limited series. They're really not bad. And like if you really just don't know where to start, picking up one of those at random is totally fine because I mean they're all pretty good and they are like not hard to follow because they're just short. So
absolutely, and I think that there's a bunch of different ways you can read these, and I want to now get into the little more practical part of the show. How do we get these comics? We know that if we want books, we go to utini.com, we look up a book profile, we click the Amazon link, and we buy our book. Super simple.
Yep.
Now, you can definitely do that for all these comics as well. We have a page for every single trade. You can go to Amazon.
Yes.
Same way.
And we're working on building out some more kind of comic-based collections and kind of a getting started guide with comics, but we don't have a lot of folks that are on our team that are super as well versed in the comics. We're really having to do a research. We want to make sure everything is really planned out before we offer advice. So.
Right. Now that being said, we would also be remiss if we didn't tell you a super awesome way to catch up with a lot of comics, right? Because if you have a digital reader of some sort, an iPad, or you like reading on the computer with ebooks, I would highly recommend Marvel Unlimited, which is essentially a Netflix service for comics in Marvel. You get every single comic Marvel has ever published up until 6 months ago. So every week, you get new comics from 6 months ago. The next week it's 6 months before that, etc. But you can have access to essentially all these Star Wars comics, and it's like $10 a month, something like that. So highly recommend checking that out, because then you can do, as Corey was saying, you can hop between series to series. I'm in the mood for Chewie today. Cool, click. I'm in the mood for Lando today. Cool, click. I'm in the mood to read 35 issues of Dr. Aphra.
Yeah.
And I found, man, I don't know about you. Do you still read all paperback, Charles? Are you all physical comics?
No, I actually mostly read digital now, but if I really like a comic, I still have that weird thing where I have to buy the physical copy and like have it on the shelf. So that's why I was holding up some of these volume 1s that I have of various series, but mostly digital.
Yeah, and the physical comics are cool to like, your friends come over, oh, here you go, borrow this, check this out. I love that.
Yeah.
But digital is a way to go. If you want to be up to date, you can go to Comixology.com, and every Wednesday they will release the same comics that the comic book store does. You just buy them online. You can get them that way. So tons and tons and tons of way to get your comics. And I hope ultimately that this episode has kind of demystified comics a little bit if you've been afraid of jumping in. I mean, there's so many awesome stories with your favorite characters that are going on, and you can see them, and you can see different artists' interpretation of them. Like, if you love looking at fan art online of other characters, like, who doesn't? This is every single week you get new art of awesome characters. Like,
totally,
you can't beat it. So Corey,
we're definitely not done with comics either.
No,
I mean,
God,
like this is like the pre-game of Utini's exploration of comics. And when we dive a little more heavily into it as individuals this fall, when we're all going to start really following every single issue as they come out, you guys will hear more from us about how to get more into this. But I hope this was helpful. It was helpful for me, kind of hearing from you guys.
Man.
We've rarely even talked about it. I think I'm actually going to take Dr. Aphra upstairs with me tonight, and I'll start that one.
Oh, I love that. Now, and I hope that, again, you guys found this enjoyable. And if you want more comics talk, or you want us to look at more comics, if you want us to put some of the stuff on Patreon, like, let us know. We want to give you guys as much awesome content as we possibly can. And if you want us to do comic reviews, if you want us to go back on some other issues on our Patreon, absolutely tweet at us, let us know, and we will make that happen. Whew. But guys, with that, it's that time, because that will do it for this week's episode of The Living Force. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe to this show wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in every single week to hear us at Utini talk about the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Please leave us a review on iTunes to help people find us, and head over to utini.com for reviews, articles, and comprehensive book profiles on every single story in the Star Wars galaxy, novels and comics alike. If you're looking to buy some books or comics and want to help support the show, look up your book or comic on Utini, click the Amazon link on the profile, and we'll get a few cents to help keep the lights on. If you'd like to help us out more directly, you can find us on patreon.com/Utini, where you can join our amazing patrons, Dylan Sasser, Adam Dyson, Timothy Dunlap, Rural Farm Boy, Chris Richmond, Adrian Carlson, and as of this episode, Ross Grieco and Taratano. Thank you all so much again for your continued support. If you want your thoughts on the show, email us at livingforcepod@utini.com, tweet at us with all those comic questions at livingforcepod, or join our Utini Discord community by going to utini.com/discord. You can find us on Twitter at Eric Eilerson, Corey is at Doc Star Wars MD, Charles is at C. Henkel. Special thank you, as always, to Matt Davenport, our amazing editor, Freddie, our producer, and Wes, our community manager. Thanks to Corey and Charles for podcasting with me, and as always, may the Force be with you.
There is no hatred. There is joy. There is no division. There is union. There is no apathy. There is passion. There is no gatekeeping. There is community. This is the Utini Star Wars fan code. Embrace it, live by it, and above all, trust in the living force. That's all for this week. Join our community and surround yourself with like-minded fans by visiting us online at utini.com. Until next time, may the force be with you.